Okay, right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a thing called the problems of global cooling. Let's think for a minute. What if global cooling is real instead of global warming? What problems would we have? Well, let's go down a list of them. One of the problems that we'd have is going to obviously be that we have a shorter growing season. Now, some scientists have said that global cooling is right, and other scientists have said that global warming is the right one. But unfortunately, there's been a huge number of scientists who've jumped on the global warming bandwagon because of the carbon tax, and they want to make a lot of money. But I don't believe in global warming. I believe in global cooling. And I'll tell you, here are some of the global cooling's problems. The first problem is you have a shorter growing season. As it gets colder and colder, areas that used to be productive in the United States, for example in northern states, will no longer be productive. You won't have enough days for a growing season, so you won't be able to plant corn and other crops that they used to plant years ago. I mean, look at Greenland. One time there were people living in Greenland. It was called Greenland for a reason. And now you can't plant any crops there because it's a lot colder. This period was known as the medieval warm period. It was a period of time when it was a lot warmer than it is now. Well, guess what? It got cold and the people, some of them starved to death, others left Greenland. But there aren't a lot of people living in Greenland now because it's really cold. Also, you might add, it's covered with ice. The important thing to remember is this. If there is global cooling, it will affect you in many ways. One of the ways in which it will affect you is you're going to see a lot of people leaving northern states to move to the south. We're already seeing that now. A lot of people are leaving to states like Texas. And the reason is pretty simple. You have these humongous heating bills. Like this year, we had a record number of below zero days, so the heating bills were astronomical. So, people are tired of paying these huge heating bills, and what they're doing is they're saying, well, maybe I can move, south to a place where there's plenty of jobs, and it's not too expensive, and I don't have these horrendous heating bills. Another thing that's happening is a lot of people are saying, well, how can we deal with this problem of global warming? And they're saying, well, we need a carbon tax, we need this, we need that. And what the carbon tax does is it makes your heating fuel even more expensive. You see, first off, there is no global warming, but there is push for a carbon tax to make fuels even more expensive. So that's going to push even more people to move to the south because people are going to have to spend even more money keeping warm. So this affects you in many different ways. The first thing that I want to point out is with global cooling, here is what I call the double whammy. First problem is your growing season is shorter. You're going to have more late frost, so the farmer will plant some tomatoes, and guess what? There's a frost, and the frost comes through and it kills all the tomatoes. Now, instead of you being able to plant tomatoes in March, you're forced to plant them in April, and now you're forced to plant them in May. In the future, you might have to plant tomatoes in June. That doesn't give you a whole lot of time until you have the next frost, which used to come in November, but then it came in October, and now it'll come maybe in September. So you'll have maybe barely enough time to get a crop. Your crop will be a lot smaller. As a result of your crop being smaller, prices will go up. You see, there's more people on the planet, but the production goes down. Another effect of global cooling, because global warming isn't occurring, is if there is global warming, obviously you're going to get more evaporation because the ocean will be warmer. But with global cooling, you have the opposite. You have less evaporation. The ocean is colder, less water evaporates and gets into the air, so rainfall amounts will go down. In fact, I've noticed that Miami used to get like 70 inches of rain back in the 60s and 70s, and they're getting maybe like 50 inches now, and they're having to ration water. And they're telling people that they can't water their lawns. Now, the reason for this, some people say, oh, there's a lot more people, population goes up. Yeah, that's one reason. But another reason is lack of rainfall. The reason why you have lack of rainfall is the ocean is colder, means less evaporation, means less rain. So you're going to have less rain and a shorter growing season. That equals smaller yields. Now, some scientists have said that global warming is bad for crops. Why would it be bad for crops? If somebody plants corn in Minnesota, they're going to be very happy if there's global warming because they'll have a longer growing season and it'll be warmer. Remember, corn will grow very slowly if it's like 60 degrees. It'll grow faster if it's 70. It'll grow a lot faster if it's 80. So if you go from 80 to like 90, corn's going to do great. It's not going to do so great if you went from like 110 to 120 though. It would get roasted. That's what would happen. But most of the people who plant corn are not in areas that are all that hot. They're in areas that are like in northern states. So these areas would have a longer growing season and they would have more rainfall. With global cooling, you have the exact opposite occurring. You have less rainfall and you have a shorter growing season. What that means is the corn will grow and it will be more slow because it's colder, and there's a shorter growing season, so the crop will always be a lot smaller. Here's the other problem. A lot of farmers allow the corn to dry. The corn's not going to get very dry if it's really, really cold. So they'll have to spend more energy drying the corn, because if you put wet corn into the elevator, it'll get moldy. You can't have that. So you're going to have to, use a lot of propane gas to dry the corn so that you can put it into the grain elevator. So your costs go up. You have a smaller crop and it's more expensive. Now, if corn prices go up, how does that affect you? Well, a lot of corn is used, as feed for chickens and cows. So expect higher milk prices. Also expect the same to happen with eggs. So that will affect you. You're going to go out and you're going to have to pay more in your grocery. So the reason that global cooling is really bad is as follows. We have approximately 7 billion people on this planet. Global cooling, what it does is it reduces the number of acres of land that you can plant, because as it gets colder, the northern states, they will not be usable anymore. Also, the states that do have land that is usable, you have a shorter growing season, so your crop is smaller. Also, you have less rainfall, so you might have a year that's really dry. Before, you had a lot more water evaporating from the ocean. Well, with global cooling, the amount of water that evaporates from the ocean is smaller. Let me explain something to you. 70% of this planet is covered by ocean. What that means is if there's global warming, it's great news for farmers because it means a lot more evaporation, a lot more rain. But with global cooling, it's the opposite. It's bad news for farmers because it means a lot less rain. Remember, farmers are dependent on rain in order to have a crop. If you don't have any rain, you have no crop. And it's a complete disaster. So you're going to have more droughts. Now, what the global warming people will tell you is the reason that you have a drought is because it's really hot. Well, that doesn't make any sense. No, the reason you have a drought is you don't have enough rain coming out of the cloud and falling down to the ground. And the reason that you're not going to have enough rain is because you don't have enough water being evaporated from the oceans. Remember, the majority of the planet is covered in ocean. It's not covered in land. Also, you're going to have less evaporation from land. For example, swamp areas such as in Florida, they'll be colder, there'll be less evaporation there. Lakes such as the Great Lakes, there'll be less evaporation, the lakes will be colder. Remember, this year we had a record amount of ice in Lake Superior. Why did that occur? Well, because it was really cold. We had a record number of below 0 days. Now, if you have the lake covered in ice, you're not going to have a lot of evaporation from the Great Lakes because they're covered with a big layer of ice. And also the water in the lakes is really cold, so it's not going to evaporate very much. So as water gets warmer, you have more rain. But as water gets colder, you have less rain. So less rain is one of the problems of global cooling. Remember, global cooling is a lot worse than global warming. If the temperature goes up a little bit, you still have really good crops. But if the temperature goes down a little bit, you have less crops. Less crops for a growing population on the planet is bad news. It will mean higher prices for everyone. So don't think that global cooling is all that wonderful. Quite the contrary. It's going to be a real headache for people. And the biggest problem that you're going to face with global cooling is going to be that you're going to have to pay a lot more. Not only for electricity in the wintertime to keep your house warm, or fuel oil, or gas, or whatever it is you use, but also you're going to have to pay more at the grocery. Because when you go to the grocery, guess what? They're going to say, oh, well, we had a really bad year, and then the prices will be sky high, and you'll have to pay. Remember, the farmers are not going to go out of business, all of them, because people still need to eat. What will happen is the prices will simply skyrocket, and they will keep going up, and people will complain. Don't expect that to change anytime soon. So the biggest problems of global cooling is, you have a lot less of the year available for use. And it'll be really cold outside. You'll have to stay inside your house. Higher prices at your grocery due to lower crop yields. You'll have to spend more money on heating expenses. And of course, here's something that very few people are talking about. As food shortages become more and more common, you will probably have wars over resources. Those will become a major headache as things get worse. And I do foresee global cooling becoming a lot worse, and I'll tell you why. The reason that I see global cooling becoming a lot worse is as follows. You're going to have a situation where countries that have a large population, like India and China, will see the food prices skyrocket, and then they'll say, hey, wait a minute, why do food prices just keep going up all the time? And they'll complain. And then countries like the United States, which is the breadbasket of the world, will say, well, that's just the way it is. We can't plant the northern states anymore. So the problem is that we have less land available for planting. And of course, this will lead to a lot of frictions. Think about all the frictions that happened when the Arabs raised the price of oil. So expect a lot of problems in the future and a lot of shortages of food and fuel and other things due to global cooling, not global warming. There is no global warming, there's global cooling. Remember, as the sun goes through what they say will be a period of like a Maunder minimum or something like that, the sun will produce less energy. This will lead to global cooling. Global warming would be if you had the sun producing more energy, but that's not the case. It's producing less energy. So expect, to see a period of time where you have less crops and higher prices.